is what we think of when we think of Easter. And we go to, well, we think of other things too, Easter bunnies and Easter baskets and Easter bonnets.
Oh,
We go and we say to each other, Happy Easter. But it is not only we who are of a Christian tradition that celebrate at this time of year. This year is unique because beginning last Friday, Passover began. And so we say, Sameach Pesach. I might have pronounced it wrong. Sameach Pesach. Happy Passover. Of course, Passover was the idea that there was freedom in remembering their past. The Jewish people remembered when they were freed from the bondage of Egypt. So it's an exciting new sense of life in that celebration as well. And then beginning the first of this month and ending the first of next month is Ramadan. For the Muslim community, we might say to them, Ramadan Mubarak, blessed Ramadan. That time when, for the Muslim community, they emphasize the choosing of that best path for them. And they celebrate it throughout the month with fasting. So it's a very exciting, life-giving time that we're in right now, in addition to the life-giving nature that surrounds us. So if you remember, if you've been with us the last couple of weeks, you know that we've used this springtime theme to start first to talk about from sleep to waking. That was the first of the series. And then the second of the series was from brown to green to a rainbow of colors. And now today, we're doing it a little bit different. We're saying first the flower and then the fruit. You'll notice that there's a continuum on all of these thoughts. And it's all about newness of life, the excitement that we have at Easter time. So in Japan, they reverence the cherry tree at springtime. Sakura, they call it. And originally, cherry trees came from Japan. 1912, in fact, the people of Japan gave to the people of the United States a number of cherry trees, which now grace the National Mall. And there's a cherry blossom festival in Washington, D.C. In Japan, it's a time for partying, a really great time for partying. The family goes together to the park and they spread a blanket underneath the blossoms of the cherry tree. And they love that sense of life that comes with the cherry blossom. So we used the flowering bulb last week as a metaphor. I'm going to switch metaphors this week. We're going to use the cherry blossom as a metaphor. If we had the screen here in person, which we don't seem to have, technology has failed us today. But those of you who are online, you probably see a cherry blossom, both the blossom and the fruit. And that's what we're going to talk about today, going from the blossom to the fruit. The core of what I want to say today is this. When we witness the track of newness of our spiritual life, as we stay on course, we will surely come to maturity. You can see how that relates to the metaphor of the cherry tree, the cherry blossom, and the fruit, the cherry fruit. Let me say that message again, that core message. As we witness the track of newness of our spiritual life, as we stay on course, we will surely come to maturity. So let's consider the metaphor that we're using, the cherry tree, and think of that cherry tree that at first, of course, was just a tree with limbs that were bare. But in the springtime, suddenly there were buds, and then there were bigger buds, and then there were blossoms. And those blossoms are glorious, glorious, glorious. And that that budding and that blossoming is it's kind of like just becoming really aware of life. In Unity, we often talk about consciousness and how we look to rise in consciousness. Consciousness is our awareness of life, sometimes subconscious, sometimes conscious, and sometimes even connected with the superconscious, with the divine. So it's awareness of life that this bud symbolizes, that this bloom symbolizes, and we look forward to the life ahead, an exciting time for sure. It flowers, the cherry blossom, in a spectacular fashion, usually white and pink, and it's just beautiful. Nothing like a cherry blossom. Reminds me of children who are growing up that blossom. I'm sure you have someone in your family that when they grew up, you just saw all the possibility of them was there for them. They were budding and they were blooming and they were coming to life. In the Hebrew tradition, one of the people that I think of is Joseph. Remember Joseph? He wasn't liked very well by his brothers, but he was by his father, and he was just such a glowing example of what a son should be. In fact, his father gave him the coat of many colors. You remember Joseph. And of course, in the Christian tradition, Jesus, who at 12 or 13 years of age went to the temple and began teaching as a child, just blooming in an extraordinary fashion. It even is true for Muhammad. In the Muslim faith, Muhammad was born and orphaned early in life. And eventually, working with his uncle, he became a trader, going from east to west and east to west and back again. Well, as you probably guess, the occupation of being a trader has some possibility for fraud, perhaps. But you know, what they found out was that Muhammad, and they called him, let me see if I get it, Al-Amin. In the midst of this trading that wasn't always too nice, he was deemed as trustworthy and faithful. And then, of course, went on to become the prophet of Islam. So these are examples of budding and blooming, but the same is true for us. The possibility of budding and blooming, the possibility of our awareness growing and rising and becoming spectacular even. Not that we ourselves with our ego are spectacular, but just that consciousness, that spirit in us becoming spectacular. That's the first part of the cherry metaphor. The next part, when those blossoms are opened, what happens? Well, the cherry tree is one that self-pollinates. So there is within that one blossom, you remember if you were in school, elementary science, the pistil and the stamen, how that they work together to fertilize the plant. Well, that's all within the single small cherry blossom. So the pollination is there, the exchange, the coming together that allows growth and reproduction. And of course, there's fertilization that goes with that. So I like to think that that's comparable to unseen work within ourselves, because you can't really see that fertilization happening. I suppose you could if you put it under a microscope, but we don't see that, and we hardly ever know aware of that. And the same is true with us as spiritual beings. What happens within us in that quiet, unnoticed place is what brings us to the spectacular end that we're looking. Remember, we're looking down toward the fruit at the end of this. So that pollination, that coming together within, that integrating of our own spirit is important. It's also important because we have the opportunity at that point to receive divine ideas into consciousness. We talk about divine ideas. We name them. We talk about the 12 powers. We talk about other qualities that we can develop and we can receive and integrate, just like a pollination and fertilization would occur in the cherry blossom. I like to think that one of those powers is very important at this stage, both for the budding and for the pollination and fertilization. That's the power of faith. Power of faith. Faith is the ability to believe with confidence. Well, you say, I can't just believe. It's, if I don't believe it, I don't believe it. When we open ourselves to faith, which is a gift, when we allow the possibility, we find that sooner or later, we arrive at a certain level of faith. Often we do that when we look back and we remember where we were. We remember the things that happened for us, that built us, that grew us, that supported us, that loved us. And when we do that, we begin to rise in consciousness. So that key element for budding and fertilization and integration, pollination, for the cherry blossom can be translated into our spiritual life as rising in consciousness by receiving divine ideas in faith. But you know what happens? We're moving on now. After those beautiful blossoms on the cherry tree, in a week, maybe two, they're gone. They fade and they scatter in the wind. You've probably seen pictures where the sidewalk or the grass was just covered with the cherry blossoms. And that in itself is a certain beauty. But on our spiritual journey, the same is true for us. We may have had a first blush of coming to a sense that we are a spirit being, and it was exciting for us, and it was a highlight in our lives. And then after a period of time, it seems to wear off. There seems to be some scattering. This is not a time to be fearful of. It is a time to be reflective of. Because during that time, then we have the opportunity to again go within where everything began to build, to find who we are as authentic and unique spiritual beings. So this is noted. I really like the scripture that says in Ecclesiastes, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. So even that excitement, then there may be a time for reflection, maybe a time to sit back. You know, remember the phrase, it's oft repeated, this too shall pass. Even the good shall pass. There will be another season. So I encourage myself to know when I'm in that season that the game is not over. It's not done. It's just a time to pull back and reflect and integrate in order that we may come again to maturity. This has been true in my life. I grew up in the family of a Baptist minister, and there was a lot of spiritual stuff and religious stuff that was thrown at me in my early life. But at one point, my path differed. And I went a different direction. I'm still excited. But at one point, I just didn't know. I was questioning. I was in that doldrum, if you will, that low place. I still had a sense that I was a spiritual being, but I couldn't put a finger on what I should be doing about it. I was scattered, just like the petals of the cherry flower, scattered, waiting for what comes next. And the power, because we were talking about powers that I think really goes with this, is the power of strength. The power of staying the course. Somebody had a great saying that they gave to me at one point that I just remember again and again. It's this: don't doubt in the darkness what was clear in the light. Don't doubt in the darkness what was clear in the light. And so there may be some darker places, some gloomy places, some I don't know what's happening places in your life. They're there for purpose, because you will get beyond those with the power of strength, staying the course. Don't give up at this point, because the best is yet to come. The next part is setting the fruit. The fruit suddenly begins to be apparent. Up until now, the fruit was not seen. We couldn't see it, but it begins to be apparent. This is true for our spiritual life as well. At a certain point, going through these other prerequisites, almost as it were, we get to the place where we can begin to think, wow, there is going to be a fruit. There is going to be maturity. Setting the fruit at first, it's very small. And, you know, the interesting thing is not every flower got pollinated and fertilized. So the fruit doesn't necessarily come from every flower that was on that tree, because some of them just didn't make it. So again, we are patient with ourselves. Again, we stay the course, because even though we may think, I should, and oh boy, don't get into the shoulds. I should be like this. I should be like that. I should be really excited. I should be filled with joy. And you're not quite there yet. Stay the course. You'll get there. And of course, there's the last stage, the coming to maturity of the fruit. This is also a bit of a delicate stage. I don't know if you've had fruit trees, but if you have had fruit trees, there's a possibility that you've been waiting for that fruit to mature, and you find that somebody else got the fruit before you did, the birds. So sometimes there's a protective nature. We protect that which we're anticipating. We guard it. We guard it with prayer. We guard it with silence and connection with the divine within. But when we do, that fruit matures and ripens, and oh, it is so delightful. This is what we've been waiting for all along. When we've gone through all of those other stages from brown to green and through the flowering and everything like that, we finally arrive at the ripe fruit. Now you say, well, I don't think I'm ever going to be awakened. I may not become enlightened. Might as well give up right now. Well, that's not the case. Because we come to a certain ripeness, and then we go the cycle again, and we come to the ripeness again. This is cyclical, as we've said before. You go through this again and again, and each time you rise a little higher. Each time the fruit is a little bit sweeter. So I encourage you to use the power of wisdom. Now, the power of wisdom is this. Apply yourself. I like the affirmation. I apply myself every day. That means I take what I've learned, I take what I have experienced, and I apply it in my life. My father used to say this to me, son, you'd be getting A's if you would just apply yourself. I wasn't happy with B's. But it's true with our spiritual journey as well. When we take that which we know, take that which comes from the knowing within us, take that which we have learned, we've taken in, then we reach maturity, a certain level of maturity. So I encourage you to look at this whole thing today. When we witness the track of newness of our spiritual life on this Easter, when we stay the course, we will surely come to maturity. That's an exciting thought. Don't get too set on exactly how that's going to happen, because when you take a particular outcome and picture it, it's got to be that way. It might not happen that way. So open yourself to the possibility of limitless maturity as the divine with you co-create that. You're not the only one in this. The divine within is there, is always there, is always a part of you. When you allow that divinity to express, you achieve what you really hope for, a spiritual maturity. Go back to the cherry blossom again. Remember how it went through all these stages. And eventually it got to that maturity, but had to go through every one of those stages. Had to go through the stage of just budding on that bare branch and then blooming, and pollinating, something that wasn't seen. And then on to setting the fruit, getting started on it. Each unique fruit in a unique way, perhaps. And finally, when it stayed attached to that tree, if the fruit fell, as you know, it might not have gotten ripe, or it might rot in the grass underneath. But when you stay connected with the divine within, then that maturity, that fruit that is to be celebrated, and that's what we celebrate today when we say, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the newness of life that is spiritual maturity. So I think, Betty, I love that affirmation. I am the resurrection and the life. I would put this along with it, that final step, that step of wisdom. I apply myself today. Just as simple. I apply myself today. When you set that intention at the beginning of the day, I think you'll find that you'll reach that goal of maturity. This is what you've been looking for all along. Happy Easter. Look forward to the excitement that's ahead for you. Don't be discouraged when you're kind of in one of those low places. It's but for a time. And so it is. Amen.